A nightmarish first date. The sun was setting as I stood outside the quaint little cafe, nervously fidgeting with the edge of my jacket. The promise of a first date always held a mix of excitement and apprehension, and tonight was no different. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my racing heart, and stepped inside. As the door tinkled softly behind me, my eyes scanned the room for my date, a guy named Alex whom I had met on a dating app. I spotted him sitting at a corner table, his back turned towards me. He had an air of mystery about him, which intrigued me. Approaching the table, I greeted him with a smile. "Hi, Alex." "I'm Emma." He turned to face me, and the first thing I noticed were his piercing blue eyes that seemed to bore into my soul. A chill ran down my spine, but I brushed it off as mere nerves. "Nice to meet you, Emma," he said, his smile warm, but something about it made me uneasy. We exchanged small talk, our conversation flowing easily as we discussed our interests and shared laughter. Yet, there was a strange undercurrent, a feeling that something was off. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, and I pushed the nagging feeling aside. After finishing our coffees, Alex suggested we go for a walk by the nearby park. The setting sun cast long shadows across the path, and as we strolled, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I glanced around, my heart racing, but the park seemed empty. "You all right?" Alex asked, his voice tinged with concern. I nodded, forcing a smile. "Yeah, just thought I heard something." As darkness settled in, we headed back towards the cafe. The streetlights flickered on one by one, and the city seemed to come alive with a new kind of energy. But my unease persisted, and when I looked at Alex, his eyes seemed darker than before, almost predatory. We reached the cafe, and he suggested we go to a more secluded spot for another round of drinks. Against my better judgment, I agreed, hoping that my unease was nothing more than an overactive imagination. The bar he took me to was dimly lit, with a low-hum conversation filling the air. We found a corner booth, and as we sat down, Alex's demeanor shifted. His smile grew wider, and his eyes gleamed with an unsettling intensity. "So, Emma, do you believe in the supernatural?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I chuckled nervously. "I find it fascinating, but I'm not sure I believe in it." His gaze intensified. "I have a story for you then, something that happened to me a while ago." Despite my unease, I leaned in, curious. Alex's story was chilling. He spoke of a remote cabin he had stayed in where strange things had happened. Lights flickering, whispers in the dark, and a constant feeling of being watched. I shivered as he described the sensation of an icy hand brushing against his skin. "You're just trying to scare me now, aren't you?" I laughed, trying to shake off the growing dread. Alex's smile widened, but his eyes remained fixed on mine. "No, Emma. I think you're the one who's been scaring me." Confused, I started to pull away, but something held me in place. The air grew colder, and the chatter in the bar seemed to fade into the background. Panic rose within me as I realized that I was trapped, unable to move or scream. "I've been searching for someone like you, Emma," Alex whispered, his voice no longer his own. "A vessel to help me cross over." My heart pounded in my chest as his words sunk in. The shadows around us deepened, and a figure began to materialize beside Alex, its form shifting between darkness and ethereal light. It was a horrifying, otherworldly creature with empty eyes and long, gnarled fingers. I struggled to break free from the invisible bonds that held me, but the more I fought, the tighter they became. The creature's gaze bore into me, and I felt as though it was peeling away layers of my soul. In that moment, a burst of light erupted from the entrance of the bar, banishing the darkness and the creature. The bonds released me, and I stumbled back, gasping for air. Standing at the entrance was a group of people, their eyes ablaze with a fierce light. They chanted words I couldn't comprehend, their voices resonating with power. The creature let out a guttural scream before dissolving into nothingness, leaving behind an eerie silence. One of the strangers, a woman with a kind smile, approached me. "Are you all right?" I nodded, still trembling. She explained that they were a group of supernatural hunters, dedicated to protecting the world from malevolent entities that sought to cross over from the other side. They had sensed the dark energy around Alex and had arrived just in time. As the night wore on, the hunters shared stories of their encounters with the supernatural. Despite the lingering fear, I found solace in their presence, knowing that there were those who stood between our world and the unknown. When the sun finally rose, I left the bar with a newfound sense of both dread and awe. My first date had turned into a nightmarish experience beyond anything I could have imagined. But as I walked away, I couldn't shake the feeling that my encounter with the supernatural was far from over and that the shadows held secrets darker than I could fathom. Story 2. The Haunting Melody of Love. It was a moonlit night when I walked into the cozy little bistro for my first date with Sarah. We had met online, and our conversations had been filled with laughter and shared interests. I was nervous, but also excited to finally meet her in person. The soft glow of the candlelit tables created an intimate atmosphere, and I spotted her sitting in a corner booth, her smile radiant. "Hey, you must be Jake," she said, standing up to greet me. I nodded, my heart racing, and we exchanged a warm hug. Her hazel eyes sparkled as she looked at me, and I knew instantly that this was going to be a special night. We settled into our seats, the conversation flowing effortlessly as we shared stories about our lives. Sarah had a natural charm that put me at ease, and soon we were both laughing and lost in each other's company. As the evening progressed, I found myself becoming more captivated by her, drawn in by her every word and gesture. As our dinner came to an end, I suggested we take a stroll along the nearby riverbank. Sarah's eyes lit up with excitement, and we headed outside. The night was serene, the moon reflecting off the calm waters of the river. We walked in comfortable silence, occasionally stealing glances at each other and sharing smiles. As we walked, I noticed a quaint old bridge up ahead, its arched silhouette adding a touch of enchantment to the scene. Sarah's eyes widened with delight, and she tugged at my arm, leading me towards it. "Let's check out the bridge," she exclaimed. I followed her, my heart racing with a mixture of excitement and anticipation. As we stepped onto the bridge, I suddenly felt a chill in the air. I shrugged it off as the cool breeze off the river and focused on Sarah, who was gazing out at the water. "This place is beautiful," she said, her voice soft and dreamy. I agreed, but something about the bridge made me uneasy. It felt as though we were being watched by unseen eyes. I brushed aside my unease, not wanting to ruin the romantic moment. And then, without warning, a haunting melody filled the air. It was soft, almost ethereal, like the echo of a distant song. I looked around, trying to locate the source of the sound, but there was no one in sight. "Did you hear that?" I asked, my voice trembling. Sarah nodded, her expression curious yet slightly apprehensive. "It's like music." The melody grew stronger, weaving through the night like a ghostly serenade. I felt a shiver run down my spine as the notes seemed to dance around us, creating an eerie ambience that clashed with the beauty of the setting. "We should probably head back," I suggested, my unease deepening. But Sarah's eyes were locked on the river, her face pale. "Look." I followed her gaze, and my heart nearly stopped. On the water's surface, ghostly figures began to materialize, illuminated by the moonlight. They were dressed in old-fashioned attire, their faces somber, and they were dancing to the haunting melody. What is this?" I stammered, my voice barely audible. Sarah's grip on my arm tightened. "I don't know, but it's beautiful and terrifying at the same time." The figures continued to dance, their movements graceful yet haunting, as though they were trapped in an eternal waltz. The melody grew louder, filling the air with a mournful sound that sent shivers down my spine. I felt a compulsion to join the dance, to surrender to the enchanting music. "No!" Sarah's voice snapped me out of my trance. "Don't listen to it, Jake." Her words jolted me back to reality, and I realized the danger we were in. The figures on the water seemed to sense our resistance, their faces contorting into expressions of anger and desperation. The melody shifted, becoming discordant and unsettling. "We have to leave, now!" Sarah exclaimed, her voice urgent. We turned and hurried back across the bridge, the melody fading behind us as we distanced ourselves from the haunted riverbank. As we reached the safety of the bistro's warm light, I looked back one last time, and the figures on the water were gone. Sarah and I sat down at our table, both of us breathing heavily, the weight of what we had experienced sinking in. We shared a glance, the bond between us deepened by the surreal encounter. "What do you think that was?" I asked, my voice shaky. Sarah shook her head, her eyes haunted. "I don't know, but I've heard stories about this place. They say the spirits of star-crossed lovers who drown in the river still dance on moonlit nights." As the night came to an end, we said our goodbyes, both of us aware that our first date had taken a truly unexpected turn. We promised to keep in touch, and I watched as Sarah disappeared into the night. Months later, as we grew closer, Sarah shared her research on the bridge and the river. The haunting melody was said to be a lament that drew in unsuspecting souls, binding them to the spectral dance for eternity. We were lucky to have escaped, and that shared experience became a defining moment in our relationship. Sarah and I found ourselves drawn together not just by the spark of our first date, but by the haunting melody that had brought us face to face with the supernatural. We learned to cherish our connection while remaining vigilant against the mysterious and unknown forces that lingered in the shadows, forever changing the course of our lives. Story 3. Echoes of Regret. It was a rainy evening when I arrived at the quaint little cafe to meet Mark for our first date. I'd heard great things about him from mutual friends, and his profile picture had that charming, disarming smile that made my heart flutter. As I entered, my wet shoes squeaked on the tiled floor, and I spotted him sitting by the window, looking even better in person. "Hi, are you Mark?" I asked, my nerves making my voice tremble slightly. He stood up and extended his hand. "Yes, you must be Emily. It's great to finally meet you." His handshake was warm, and his deep blue eyes seemed to hold a promise of an interesting evening ahead. We settled into a corner booth, and the conversation flowed effortlessly. He had a knack for storytelling, and I found myself hanging onto his every word. The hours passed quickly, and before I knew it, the rain had stopped and the cafe was closing up. Mark looked apologetic. "I didn't realize we'd been talking for so long. How about we continue our date somewhere else?" I agreed, secretly thrilled that our conversation had been so engaging. He suggested we take a walk through the nearby park, and I nodded, feeling a sense of adventure as we stepped out into the cool, damp night. As we strolled through the park, Mark's stories took on a darker tone, his words painting vivid images of ancient legends and supernatural encounters. I shivered, not just from the cold, but from the eerie atmosphere he was creating. "Come on, don't tell me you're scared," he teased, his smile playful. I laughed nervously, trying to shake off the unease settling over me. "I'm not scared, just intrigued." Mark's smile widened, and he led me to a secluded part of the park, hidden from the streetlights. The moon was just a sliver in the sky, casting long shadows that danced around us. The air seemed to grow colder, and I couldn't help but glance around, feeling as though we were being watched. He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a hushed whisper. "Have you heard the legend of this park, Emily?" I shook my head, my curiosity piqued despite the unsettling feeling in my gut. He began to tell me about a tragic love story from decades ago, of a couple whose love was forbidden by their families. The tale involved a secret meeting in this very park, where the couple had promised to be together no matter what. However, their love was discovered, leading to a violent and gruesome end. As Mark spun his tale, I could almost feel the weight of the tragedy hanging in the air. Goosebumps prickled my skin, and I laughed to cover my discomfort. "You're quite the storyteller, Mark." He grinned, his eyes holding a mysterious glint. "But what if I told you that this legend is true? That the souls of those lovers still wander these grounds, searching for a chance to reunite?" I chuckled nervously, his words sending a shiver down my spine. "You really know how to set the mood, don't you?" Mark's expression grew serious, and he reached out to touch my arm. "Emily, there's something you should know. I'm not just a storyteller. I have a gift, the ability to connect with the supernatural." My heart raced, and I pulled my arm away, my nerves getting the best of me. "You can't be serious." He nodded solemnly. "I am. And sometimes, on nights like this, I can feel their presence." Before I could respond, a chilling wind swept through the park, rustling the leaves and making me regret not bringing a jacket. Mark's gaze fixed on a spot near a cluster of trees, his expression distant. "They're here," he whispered. I turned to look, my heart pounding in my chest, but I saw nothing out of the ordinary. The silence that followed was suffocating, broken only by the distant hoot of an owl. "Mark, this isn't funny," I said, my voice trembling. He turned to face me, his eyes filled with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. "I'm not joking, Emily. I can sense their energy. They're drawn to us." A wave of panic washed over me, and I took a step back. "I think I should go. This is too much for me." Mark's expression shifted, his eyes narrowing in a way that sent a fresh wave of fear through me. "You can't leave, Emily. They won't let you." I turned and began to walk away, my heart racing as I tried to ignore the unease that had settled in the pit of my stomach. The sound of footsteps echoed behind me, and I glanced over my shoulder to see Mark following me. "Stay with me, Emily," he called out, his voice now tinged with desperation. I quickened my pace, my instincts telling me that I needed to get away from him and whatever was happening in that park. As I reached the edge of the park, the feeling of being watched intensified, and I broke into a run. My apartment building finally came into view, and I dashed inside, locking the door behind me. I collapsed onto the couch, my breathing ragged, and tried to shake off the terror that had taken hold of me. Over the next few days, I couldn't shake the feeling of being haunted, as though something from that park had followed me home. I even thought I saw fleeting glimpses of shadowy figures out of the corner of my eye. Sleep became elusive, my nights filled with unsettling dreams and a constant sense of dread. I decided to do some research on Mark, hoping to find some rational explanation for his behavior. But my search turned up nothing, no social media profiles, no mutual friends, nothing to confirm his existence beyond that one night. One evening, as I was trying to distract myself with a book, I heard it, a faint, haunting melody that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. My heart raced as I realized it was the same melody Mark had described in his stories, the same melody that was said to be a love song between the spirits of the doomed lovers. I followed the sound to my balcony, the rain now falling steadily. And there, standing in the downpour, was Mark. His eyes were filled with a mixture of longing and sadness as he looked up at me. "I'm sorry, Emily," he said, his voice barely audible over the rain. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen." I was torn between fear and pity as I watched him, the melody continuing to weave its mournful spell around us. But I knew I couldn't let this continue, whatever Mark was or whatever he had brought into my life. I needed to break free from its hold. Summoning all the courage I had, I stepped away from the balcony and closed the door. The melody grew fainter, and Mark's figure slowly disappeared into the darkness. The haunting sound finally faded, leaving behind a heavy silence that was almost as unsettling. In the days that followed, the feeling of being haunted gradually lifted, and I began to regain a sense of normalcy. I never heard from or saw Mark again, but the memory of that night lingered like a chilling echo. It was a first-date horror story, that death.